On tonight's summary of the Israel-Hamas War, day 144, details are being released about the second Paris summit framework and its proposal. Hamas still says many parts of it are unacceptable. Intensive fighting reported in the Zeitoun areas of the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. Ongoing and continuous escalations between Hezbollah and Israel. The IDF's main Air Force base was hit by Hezbollah's anti-tank missiles. U.S. President Biden says Israel may lose support due to its government. Netanyahu sends a recorded response. Hello everyone, I'm Alon Burstein, visiting assistant professor in the Department of Political Science and Israel Institute Fellow at the University of California, Irvine. Here I bring you the summary of the last 24 hours of the Israel-Hamas War. It is currently the evening of February 27, 2024 in the United States, the morning of February 28, 2024 in the Middle East. Starting with the hostage situation, more information came out today about what was proposed in the second Paris summit. According to the reports regarding the release of Palestinian prisoners, during the first phase, Israel agreed for a total release of 404 Palestinian prisoners from Israeli jails in exchange for the release of 40 hostages that are held in the Gaza Strip. According to these reports, there was a different formula worked out for each category of hostage. These included releasing 7 Israeli hostage women in exchange for 21 Palestinian prisoners, in accordance with the formula from the last truce of 3 Palestinian prisoners per each Israeli hostage. Then 15 hostage men over the age of 50 in exchange for 90 Palestinian prisoners, a formula of roughly 6 prisoners per hostage. 12 sick hostages in exchange for 156 Palestinian prisoners, a formula of 12 to 13 prisoners per hostage. And the release of 5 female IDF soldiers in exchange for 90 Palestinian prisoners, including 15 quote-unquote heavy prisoners that are sentenced to life in Israeli jails. Included in this are the release of 47 Palestinian prisoners who were released in the Shalit hostage deal of 2011 and have since been arrested again. With regards to the humanitarian situation, Israel agreed to a substantial increase of up to 508 trucks a day entering the Gaza Strip, allowing the entrance of 200,000 tents and 60,000 mobile homes, permitting international actors to begin rebuilding Gazan hospitals and allowing equipment to enter the hospitals, and even allowing the entrance of heavy industrial equipment to begin removing rubble. That was a specific bone of contention because Israel said that heavy industrial equipment can also be used in order to rebuild tunnels. Israel also agreed, like in the first truce, to stop flyovers over the Gaza Strip during the truce that would last 40 days. Asharka al-Awsat reported today that Hamas has stated that the framework is not acceptable in its current form and demands changes, but that the bone of contention is not the changes that Hamas demands in the prisoner formula, but rather the disagreement that still exists between the sides about IDF redeployment and enabling Palestinians to return to the northern parts of the Gaza Strip already in the first phase of the truce. Israel has reportedly agreed to a gradual return of Palestinian civilians, who are not of military age, to the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. However, Hamas insists on IDF redeployment outside the centers in the Gaza Strip and a complete freedom of movement from south to north and from north to south. Meanwhile, after President Biden expressed optimism about the deal being close, and the White House again today stated that every day advances are made, sources both in Israel and Hamas were reportedly surprised by these statements, each saying that while progress has been made, the deal is still far from being reached. President Biden also said that Israel has agreed to halt its fire during Ramadan to allow hostages to be released. Reportedly, there's also some confusion in Israel and Hamas regarding these statements. This may be he's referring to the fact that, according to at least the United States timetable, a hostage deal will be reached by Ramadan, and therefore Israel will halt the fire and hostages will be released. However, it's also possible that this relates to Israel's promise not to invade Rafah before its evacuation. Remains to be seen. Meanwhile, alongside all this, negotiations are ongoing in Qatar. Qatar reported today that no breakthroughs were made, but that Qatar is still optimistic. Moving on to the Gaza Strip, there was a barrage of rockets sent from the Gaza Strip targeting the southern parts of Israel today. These targeted the areas of Zikim, Netiv HaAsara, Kremye, and for the first time in 10 days, 2 rockets were also sent towards the city of Ashkelon. The Palestinian Islamic Jihad claimed responsibility for those rockets that were sent to Ashkelon. Reportedly, they were both intercepted. However, there was still some damage done from the interceptors. Regarding the fighting in the Gaza Strip, in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, there's continued substantial IDF activity in the Zeitoun area in the Gaza city. The Al-Qassam brigades reported intensive gun battles throughout the day in these areas, adding that Hamas units attacked an IDF bulldozer and a tank with mortars. The IDF reported uncovering several weapons caches in the area, as well as weapons manufacturing sites. A tunnel was also located with several Hamas operatives in it. Reportedly, they were killed and the tunnel was destroyed. The Al-Quds brigades of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad also reported about the intensive fighting in the Zeitoun area, stating that operatives used unexploded devices that had been dropped by the IDF in order to convert them into local explosive devices and target IDF soldiers, reporting that several soldiers were killed and injured in these attacks. In the central parts of the Gaza Strip, there's ongoing IDF activity, with substantial engineering units reportedly destroying dozens of structures that the IDF has stated were used for terrorism purposes. Aerial attacks against launching sites and several homes from which rockets were launched yesterday were also noted in the central parts of the Gaza Strip. Several Hamas operatives were also arrested as they tried to evacuate fighting areas alongside civilians. The bulk of the fighting remains in the southern parts of the Gaza Strip, although like yesterday there were very few reports from the IDF or from the Al-Qassam brigades or from other Palestinian news sites regarding what's going on in those areas. Bombings were reported in the Al-Qarara area in the northeastern parts of the city, and in the Abasan area in the eastern parts of Khan Yunis fighting continues. Al-Qassam reported targeting Israeli forces with anti-personnel explosives. Other news from the Gaza Strip. Palestinian news sources reported today that in Rafah, violence broke out between local armed factions and the Hamas police, with one police officer being killed. According to reports, the protests were held near the Kuwaiti hospital, in which people raised a banner and chants against Hamas for stealing humanitarian aid, and riots broke out as a result. Hamas police in Rafah in general are in somewhat of a state of decay. Between the Israeli assassinations of the police leadership and Palestinian pressure, all these have led to many police officers stopping to report for duty, which in turn has also contributed to less and less aid trucks that are coming through Rafah, because these aid trucks are required to come through with police escort. Yesterday, Hamas operatives opened fire at Palestinian civilians in Rafah as Hamas took over aid that was paradropped in the region. Likely this is what fueled those demonstrations today. Other news, the IDF spokesperson stated today in regards to the Rafah operation that two conditions must be met before the operation takes place. He stated that the coordination must be finalized with Egypt, and that there's a need to evacuate civilians to an area where they have food and medical facilities. He added that when these conditions are met, the IDF will be able to launch the operation. Regarding casualties, 2 IDF soldiers reported killed in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours, bringing the total number of IDF soldiers killed in the Gaza Strip since the invasion began to 242. 20 IDF soldiers reported injured in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours, bringing the total number of IDF soldiers injured in the Gaza Strip since the invasion began to 1,428. I will note that when the IDF put out notices about those deaths and injuries, it stated that they occurred in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, so likely they did occur in those areas of Zeitoun in Gaza City. The Palestinian Health Ministry in the Gaza Strip is reporting that 96 Palestinians were killed in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours, bringing the total number of Palestinians killed in the Gaza Strip since the war began to 29,878. 70,215 Palestinians reported injured in the Gaza Strip, and several thousand are still buried under the rubble and presumed dead. Moving on to the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip, the Palestinian Health Ministry reported that 2 more infants died as a result of malnutrition and dehydration in the Kamal Adwan hospital in Beit Lahia, that is in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, adding that thousands of babies and pregnant women are at risk of starvation, malnutrition, and dehydration. Amidst this, a senior figure in the UN humanitarian agencies warned the UN Security Council today that at least 576,000 Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, that is a quarter of the population, are one step away from being declared as in famine conditions. He emphasized that the situation is deteriorating at an alarming rate. In other news, it was the second paradropping mission of food throughout the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours. 7 cargo planes participated, including 3 Jordanian planes and 1 each from Egypt, Qatar, France, and the United Arab Emirates. Jordan released pictures of the Jordanian King Abdullah taking part in flying one of the planes. Egypt reported that between Egypt, Jordan, and the United Arab Emirates, 45 tons of aid were dropped in the Gaza Strip. Sources in the Gaza Strip stated, however, that the paradropping missions only took place in the center and southern parts of the Strip, not in the north. It was not reported if this was as a result of restrictions that were imposed or simply as a result of where the planes coordinated the dropping sites. There are no reports made about how many aid trucks entered the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours. This has been a constant in the last several weeks, ever since protests started in the different crossings in Israel, as well as since the Rafah crossing has not been functioning as a result of the lack of Palestinian police, as I stated above. Moving on to the West Bank, there was substantial IDF activity reported in several areas of the West Bank. 1 Palestinian was shot and killed today as he tried to cross over the security fence in the El Muntar area near Jerusalem. In the Tubas operation I reported yesterday, with the Palestinian Islamic Jihad figure Ahmed Dragme was killed, 2 more Palestinians were reportedly killed in the confrontations. A total of 14 Palestinians were reported arrested throughout the West Bank in the last 24 hours. Other news related to the West Bank, the U.S. Secretary of Treasury, Janet Yellen, stated today that the process of transferring the tax money to the Palestinian Authority has already begun, calling for it to continue. She also stated that she had written a letter to Prime Minister Netanyahu calling upon Israel to renew the work permits of Palestinians from the West Bank and remove trade restrictions in order to allow the West Bank economy to begin to recuperate. Other news, tensions are continuing to rise in Israel with regards to the month of Ramadan that is due to start on March 10th, March 11th, after Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu accepted the demand of the Minister of National Security Itamar Ben-Gvir that Israel place new restrictions on the access of Palestinians and Arab Israeli citizens to the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. Today, Israeli Defense Minister Gallant stated that Hamas is going to try to utilize Ramadan in order to launch their second phase of October 7th, igniting Jerusalem and the West Bank. Gallant criticized people in Israel who, he stated, are supposed to be responsible but act irresponsibly, stating that irresponsible words can turn single events into a snowball that will be unstoppable and a complete flare-up in the entire region. Moving on to the northern parts of Israel, southern parts of Lebanon, ongoing and continuous substantial escalations were noted today between the sides. Barrages of rockets were sent from Lebanon targeting the northern parts of Israel. These targeted the areas of Miron, Misgav Am, Margaliot, Yarka. In the upper Galilee, there were also rockets sent toward the areas of Tzivon, Sasa, and Kfar Hoshen. There was a barrage towards the western Galilee and the areas of Naharia. Over 20 rockets were launched simultaneously. According to some reports, these included Katyusha missiles. There were also drone alerts in the upper Galilee in the areas of Ma'ale Yosef, Beit Jan, Pkin, and Khorfish. In addition to this, Hezbollah stated that they launched 2 attacks against the Israeli main Air Force base in Mount Meron area, which Hezbollah has targeted before. It was later reported by the IDF that anti-tank missiles did in fact hit the base, however they stated no damage was done. Hezbollah stated that the attacks against the airbase were retaliation for the IDF's attacks yesterday in the Baalbek area, and in addition to this, Hezbollah also claimed 5 border incidents against different IDF outposts along the border. Regarding IDF activity, the IDF carried out several rounds of attacks throughout the day. These included targeting Hezbollah infrastructures in the areas of Ataibe, Beit Lif, Tzidkin, Harbat Salem. The military also specifically stated that in response to the barrage to the western Galilee, military structures and several Hezbollah infrastructures were also targeted in the areas of Al-Haniya, Jabshit, Basaria, and El Masuri. The IDF reported also artillery fire along the border in the Yarun area. In Lebanon, Al-Ahbar reported that 2 people were injured in an IDF drone attack in the areas of Ita Shabab. El-Manar also reported IDF artillery fire in the areas of Markaba and Misel Jabel, and mortar fire in Yarun and El Wazani was also noted. Al-Miyan reported artillery attacks also occurred in the Hula village, and other Lebanese sources also noted more attacks in Tir Kharfa. Other news, Reuters quoted Hezbollah sources again stating today that negotiations over the situation in southern Lebanon are futile until there's a ceasefire in Gaza. They added that the moment Hamas declares a ceasefire, Hezbollah will adhere to it and stop its activities in the southern border of Lebanon, as it did in the last ceasefire. Responding to a question about Israel's declared intentions to not halt fire against Hezbollah, the sources added that Hezbollah will then retaliate accordingly. Moving on to some of the regional developments, there was a report several days ago in Israel that the Houthis have begun targeting the communications arrays in the underwater cables that go around the Gulf of Aden and the Bab el-Mandeb Straits. This was not reported anywhere else. Today, the Houthis officially responded, stating that they have not attacked these communication cables, stating that they will not attack these communication cables at these times, and in addition adding that if the cables have been damaged, they are willing to facilitate with repairing them as long as they are provided with the right equipment. Moving on to some of the political and general trends for the last 24 hours. President Biden was a guest on the Late Night Show. When he was asked about the war, he expressed great criticism of Israel's government, stating, and I quote, "Israel has had the overwhelming support of the vast majority of nations. If it keeps this up with this incredibly conservative government they have, Ben-Gvir and others, they're going to lose support from around the world. And this is not in Israel's interests." Biden added that he is a Zionist, and he stated that, and I quote, "The only way Israel ultimately survives is to take advantage of an opportunity to have peace and security for Israelis and Palestinians who are being used as pawns by Hamas." He called for a process towards a 2-state solution, guaranteeing Israel's security, adding, "There's ways to do this, but in the meantime, there are too many innocent people being killed." Hours later, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu recorded the video message, and his office explicitly stated that he was answering President Biden in this message. He stated, and I quote, "Since the beginning of the war, I am running a diplomatic campaign with the aim of withstanding the pressures to prematurely end the war and to gain us support. And we see the results. Today, a poll was published in the United States that shows that 82% of the American public supports Israel. 4 out of 5 people in the U.S. support Israel and not Hamas, and this gives us the strength to continue the war until complete victory. Now, it is noteworthy that while that survey was in fact published, Netanyahu is ignoring other aspects in the poll. Some of these showed, for example, that 45% of the people asked in the survey do not think that Congress should pass aid packages from the U.S. to Israel, and that 32%, that is almost 1 out of every 3 people, does not think that Israel is actually trying to avoid civilian casualties in the war, and 33% are in favor of an immediate unconditional ceasefire. So this is part of the ongoing blows between Israel and the United States, or President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu, as the two continue to escalate their rhetoric with regards to the war and the future of the Gaza Strip. If you enjoy these reports, please do remember to subscribe, give them a like. If you want to know when they come out, turn on notifications. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comment section below. That is my report for the last 24 hours. I'll be back tomorrow.